I did go and see him last week, and we had a chat, and went over some of the old anecdotes and had a laugh, and it was great to see him. I mean, I have kept in touch, obviously, but I don't know. He first started here full time when I was here in 1983. He came up to do Mandate, and we did Mandate together for 7 years till I left. And I have said to him many times how incredibly lucky I was to have him as a colleague.
He was always very helpful to colleagues.
He was wonderful. He was the same every day, whereas I was up and down and hysterical and all. I must have been awful to work with. David was the same every day.
A constant.
Constant. Never lost his temper. Was never nasty about anybody. He was a perfect gentleman. He was a really good human being, but at the same time incredibly professional. And he was in here before me every morning. I'd come in at 6:30. He'd already been in here. He just loved it. He never went to work because this was his real passion. And always smartly dressed, turned out, tie, slacks, sports jacket, and could turn his hand to anything. I learned so much from him, from his interviewing technique, and he could just do anything. He was amazing.
His interviewing technique was quiet but precise, forensic.
Oh, absolutely. And I've often listened to his... we're doing a lot of archiving now, digitising the old tapes, and of course he's on most of them. He could ask the most simple question in such a way as the listener would sit back and say, yeah, go on, what did you have for breakfast? Whatever it was, he made it sound really interesting. And that's a great skill. And of course, he had a perfect radio voice. It was warm, but full of character. You only need to hear one word, and you know it's David Callister.
Aside from Mandate, and we've got to be careful we don't miss things out, because there was so much he did up here.
Yes.
Man in Line, of course, was a big part of his broadcasting career, and
but
the likes of Marge and others.
That's right, Marge, as they were known as the Manx Radio Telephone Repertory Company. They were the same group on every day, but David was brilliant with them. But don't forget, he used to commentate for the TT.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an immense skill, all the knowledge he had for that. His country and western programme. He'd even done Women's Hour at some point. There was nothing he couldn't do. Tynwald Day commentary. And, of course, long knowledge of the politics of the island. So he really did hold the politicians to account. In fact, one day, David and I did an interview on Mandate with some MHK who was about to introduce a bill into the Keys. And it was quite obvious the guy had no idea what he was talking about. So it was rather like taking sweets off a child, actually. But when he stood up to ask for leave to introduce the bill, another member stood up and said to Charlie Carush, the Speaker, he said, on account of the interview I've heard this morning, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to support this. And the whole thing was thrown out. Well, Charlie Carush was furious. He was incandescent. I thought his wig was going to hit the ceiling. He said, Honourable Members, may I remind you that this is the forum for public debate, not that alternative government on Douglas Head. Well, David and I were thrilled by that, to think that we were regarded as the alternative government. It's the best thing Charlie could have said.
There's other stuff, of course, Kelly's Eye, a lot of series with Peter Kelly, and Two Old Farts, dare I say it, with Terry Kringle.
Well, even more than that, I mean, in his later years here at Manx Radio, he did this long series of interviews, Time to Remember, with so many of the elderly people on the Isle of Man, and they are classics, because they warmed to him. You know, you can hear the teacups chinking in the background as he went round their cottages and farms and stuff. And that's now a vital archive. It's all up on the Culture Vannin website. But he just knew everything about what they were talking, and he joked with them and goaded them and coaxed them and got the most wonderful stuff. And then, having sat through, 100 sittings of Tynwald when we were doing Mandate, he then went and stood for the Legislative Council. It didn't put him off, And, of course, he was up there as well and made an amazing contribution.
Just to finish with, is that a fitting epitaph in many ways, that he could talk to anybody and get the best out of them?
I think you could definitely say that. He was a model broadcaster and a model man.